Welcome to the June 7th, 2010 informational meeting. We'll call the meeting to order with a staff report from Deborah A. Owen.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Sioux Falls City Council. A couple of things to update you on regarding some leadership notes from last week. There's been just discussion about moving those council committees that are held after the informational, moving those to the chambers instead of having them in the overflow room, and I just think there will be continued discussion on that, but I wanted to just let you know that council leadership did visit with the administration about that. And then on that note, just to update the public about the new assignments for council committees. Audit will have Greg Jameson and Jim Enteman. Fiscal, the chair will be Councilmember Vernon Brown. With the other council members attending will be Sue Aguilar, Greg Jameson, and Rex Rolfing. The Land Use Committee will be chaired by Councilmember Bob Litz, and other committee members will include Michelle Erpenbach and Rex Rolfing. And then Public Services will be chaired by Kenny Anderson, Jr., and other members will consist of Sue Aguilar, Vernon Brown, and Michelle Erpenbach. And then on tonight's agenda, there's a couple of things I just kind of wanted to roll through with all of you to remind you about. There will be a request to defer item number 26 for 1 week. That's being requested by the conditional use permit applicant and by the neighbors. And so you'll need to do a motion to postpone definitely to a date certain, and I think that language has been given to you by Tamara Jorgensen. But that was to move that back 1 week. And then also, further back in the agenda, item 40, just to remind those who are new and to remind the council members, this is a request to deny, and so we always vote in the affirmative. So you'll be making a motion to deny that. So if you don't want to deny it, you need to vote no. You're making a motion to deny, so yes vote will be to deny that. Motion to approve, pardon me, motion to approve, and when you vote yes, it will be to deny that that motion. So, and that would be item 40 again, I believe.
39, I think.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And then also, items 45 and 47. Item 45 was discussed in the red notes briefly that was sent to you on Friday. There will be a motion by Litz and Anderson to refer that to the Public Services Committee. Just so you know, that is item 45. It has to do with the complaint procedure for the Board of Ethics. Again, there'll be a motion by Anderson and I think seconded by Litz to refer that to the Public Services Committee. And then, and I think there's language there for you from Tamara as well for the 7 o'clock agenda. Item 46 is the appointment of counsel to the UDC and CCOG boards. If you have any questions about that, please look at your Granicus electronic attachment. But I also have some notes here for who is being appointed. Let me just read those to you. To CCOG, it will be Kenny Anderson, Jr. and Vernon Brown, with the alternate being Rex Rolfing. For UDC will be Michelle Erpenbach, Bob Litz, Rex Rolfing, and Kenny Anderson, Jr., and the alternates will be Sue Aguilar and myself. And again, that is item 46. Lastly, item 47 is the notice of transfer appropriations from within major organizational units. We had met with leadership last week, and Mark Cotter had briefed the leadership on some more details of that. I've made a copy of that, and a memo is by each of your desks regarding those transfers. And then also in your mailbox, I included just a brief memo concerning the charter provisions on that, and then a subsequent revision of an ordinance by council in 2009 to require that those be on the regular agenda. So that is in your mailbox. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Any questions of Deborah? We should think a little bit more. Maybe we can cover it in the open discussion, but I know we've got a lot of things to cover today, but consider the idea of where we should hold our committee meetings and how we do those. Think about that before we do it. Maybe talk to some other counselors who've been around and how they've experienced those committee meetings over the years, but something to consider. All right, let's move on to Mayor Huther's office. I believe Mark Cotter has unless the mayor's here. Oh, I see the mayor's here. But whoever would like to address the council. Mark.
Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. There was an email that was forwarded to our office from Councilor Erpenbach that asked us to come to the City Council meeting and just provide some background on the intersection at Burnside and Madison, what we've observed, how we respond to some of the concerns that came from the property owner that's in the north and west corner. And so just in the interest of time, we've provided you two exhibits, one of which is an aerial image, and one is an advisory sign. Simply put, this is a unique intersection, and we have seen volumes from traffic increase over time. The volumes that you see on Madison Street are in the yellow boxes, and you see from 2005 to 2009 that the volume that approaches from the west has increased from 7,200 vehicles per day up to nearly 9,000. And from the east approach, heading due west, the volumes have increased from 3,400 vehicles per day up to 4,500. That movement has been primarily, we expect, increased with the direct connection to I-29 with the new interchange. Burnside still is relatively consistent, as well as Lincoln. This is currently an intersection that's got 4 stop signs today. But overall, over the last 5-year period from 2005 to 2009, it does not show to have accidents higher than anything else that we would expect would happen in an interchange with this volume of vehicles. There is one of the criteria that we look at is that have the accidents actually been reported to the state? And to be reported to the state, the vehicles either have to sustain more than $1,500 in damage, or there has to be an injury. And so, of the 11 accidents that have occurred in the past 5 years, only 4 of them have actually been reported to the state. I would say, just recently with the pavement repair that we've performed on Madison as well as Burnside, it brings to light that is the city actually doing the long-term improvements to this street. And I would say that we're trying to maximize the pavement that's existing. But I think it will continue to be one of the intersections that we watch. Obviously, I think that with the direct connection to I-29, we want people to use Madison. It's highly probable that in the future, with more events and more intensive events at the arena area, that Madison likely will have to become the primary through street, which one of the alternatives to make that happen then would be to take Burnside and essentially tee it into Madison. And I think, at least from our standpoint, the fact that we have other intersections in the city that have higher degrees of concerns, that we've got some options that we can start with in the interim. This sign that you have, this is a brand new sign that's an advisory sign. This intersection is unique, and many people, as they approach it, already recognize that it's unique, so they already start to slow down. The speed limit on Burnside is 30 miles an hour. This sign would be a precaution as you were on Burnside and you're approaching and driving due northwest, that it essentially says that the thickness of these arrows highlight that you're on the primary road, but you're going to approach in the intersection on a curve where there are small streets like Lincoln and to some extent Madison, because Madison's a stop condition. So to not overspeak the item tonight, and we're certainly more than happy to sit down with that property owner and share with them our thoughts, some of our preliminary geometrics that we could certainly see come forward in some point in the future when volumes increase that may raise the concern. We are prepared to actually put this sign up, since this is a brand new sign that's been developed by the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. And essentially what it would do is it's an advisory that this is a situation that you're about to approach, and we recommend that you drop down to 20 miles an hour. Counselor.
You know, I look at this sign though, Mark, and I'm thinking, wow, this is a line going through an arrow, don't turn to the left. In other words, I'm kind of simple when I look at that. You're going to have
Right.
to educate the people on the new sign laws, I'm afraid.
Right.
I think this would be more confusing than what's there now.
Okay.
Ken?
Mark, over there, they're doing construction right now. How long is that project going to last? That's causing probably more confusion than the intersection itself.
You're right, Counselor. There is, just with the channelizing devices, I have not drove that road in probably the last week and a half, but we are wrapping up because that contractor is actually moving to the next project that he has bid. And so I would expect if it's not closed out, it'll be closed out in the very near future. They essentially started with doing the outside lanes and then the center turn lane, and I can certainly check on the timing of that project for you.
Councilor Herpenbach?
Chairman or Director Cotter, could you talk about other intersections like this in terms of numbers of vehicles? Can you give us some comparisons?
Yeah, I mean there are intersections throughout the city that we're looking at for capacity. Not to maybe to go kind of much larger, but one that's queued up for next year is 10th and Cliff. That's an intersection that's got higher accident rates than what we should see there, and so we've got a plan in place that the work that we just did was simply a surfacing improvement to get that intersection to 2011. But essentially that has determined that we need dual lefts in each direction and right turn lanes in 3 of the 4 intersections. Another one would probably be 14th in Minnesota. When you look at 14th in Minnesota, as it connects, 14th Street is getting volumes to it that we need dual lefts that would be westbound to southbound. And also a right turn lane that would be westbound to northbound. But in the interim, what's happening is that intersection is getting, we're not able to get enough green time to pass the 14th Street traffic through it. And so it's affecting Dakota Avenue, which is immediately 1 block to the east. And so that's a project that we are programming as early as next year to do from Minnesota Avenue to Phillips. We've got a pavement condition to address, but we also have a capacity issue. So our traffic team, which is led by Dallas Hofer, he's here tonight as well, but they look at these, they gauge them through and across the city. Mayor Huther asked me just the other day, do you guys consider, and we went through a series of intersections, and those are the improvements. Normally, the roadways through and across the city have the capacity. It's at the intersections where we've got to optimize the capacity. So that would just be 2 that I could mention.
Well, and you talked about this one being unique, and it is. It's configured sort of oddly. It throws me every time I go through it, sorry.
Right.
And I'm not a big fan of the new sign either. I'm kind of like Jim. I'm going, But my question then is, numbers-wise, when could we expect that this becomes, I mean, even the growth just in the last year or so has been dramatic because of the interstate exchange. What number do we need to get it to really redesign it or do whatever dramatic needs to be happening to fix this?
Well, I think it'll be a balance between volumes, and it'll also be a balance of what we see happening out there. But I also think that anytime that's really the next level as we look at what will potentially happen on the event center campus for the arena, all the transportation improvements in that area really have to be studied, and we've got to optimize how vehicles get away from that event center. And so this would be a key one. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we recognize that happens here is that if you're traveling westbound to eastbound, and I take this a lot because my kids go to school up at Jane Addams, I take this movement on Madison and down Burnside, and what it does is it puts quite a bit of traffic on 6th Street from west to Minnesota. And until we don't want to further tax that neighborhood. And so we truly want vehicles over time, if we see these volumes increase, to more use Madison. So when they get to Western or West, they either consider using Russell, 8th Street, or 12th Street to disperse and move through and across the city. So it's a balance. I would tell you that it is unique, but people recognize that it's unique as they approach it. The two that are highlighted in 2008 that are near West Sioux Hardware's building, both were overdriving the conditions. Both were icy conditions. And I'm told the one that's farther to the west admitted they were driving 45 miles an hour when it was icy. And so when the speed limit set at 30 miles an hour, I mean, I recognize that they're concerned, but we've also, some of the improvements that we would do would not correct people from overdriving the conditions.
Yeah, exactly. So just to finalize, I apologize, but we're going to put this up for sure. Are we going to do that?
Well, we have that as our option, and if there is concern here, we'll certainly go back to the traffic team and see it. Again, it's an advisory sign, and we could potentially just look at stating that reduced speed.
Yeah, even the
ahead
20
to
miles per
20
hour,
miles
that
an
would
hour.
help, I would think.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mark, do you have is there a sign in here that says horrible intersection, watch out, or something like that, just to, warn everybody? Flashing lights, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I'll certainly task Dallas Hofer with that. Dallas is the expert in this area,
I
and
don't-
we'll come
you know-
up with a workable solution.
Sometimes a simple solution like that is a lot better than, a sign that nobody understands. And, if you could do something like that, that might be better. I'm concerned coming down here, because I've driven that many times too, and I look at those two accidents that impacted that building right there, and those are the serious ones, as far as I'm concerned. Running into a building, and even if the guy's going, obviously going 40 miles an hour, 45 miles an hour there, overdriving, but the one, looks like they just missed the whole thing and thought the road was straight.
That's right.
And, I don't care if we got to go speed bumps or something, that's something probably needs to be done there.
Yeah.
No, very good. We've heard
Well,
the
I
concern.
would just
We'll-
invite you, the property owners are here, if you could just connect with them, that'd be awesome, just
Yeah.
kind of help them walk through this. Thanks,
Certainly.
Mark.
We can do that as well today, just with Dallas here. So thank you very much.
Super.
Thanks, Mark. We'll go through the committee reports. Starting with the audit committee, we're working on scheduling a follow-up audit committee meeting in a couple weeks, I think. Fiscal committee?
Time permitting, we will meet in the overflow room right after this.
Land use?
No report.
Public services committee?
No report.
All right, we'll move into city council open discussions. Anybody have, Bob Litz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, there was one thing here I wanted to speak up about. I know that the transition here, we moved in on the 17th, had our first meeting, and not much has been done since then, but I would like to comment on, there's been things going on at the leadership meeting, things that were talked about, and I thought that the idea with the leadership was going to be that some information would come back to the council, and I don't know, maybe I missed something, but I haven't heard anything about the 2 or 3 meetings that you've gone to, and I would just request that the council be updated on, ideas and things that go on at those meetings. I'd request that of the leadership.
Would you like that done now, or in an email, or?
Well, whenever you choose to do so, Mr. Chair, I would just say in the future that, we're real interested in what's going on at the leadership meetings.
Well, we can cover that right now. The first meeting, I believe we did cover, was real brief. We talked about where the restrooms were and just some basic principles on how we're going to get together. The second one, which was the only other one, which occurred last Thursday, the mayor was gone. We improvised with Mark Cotter and Bill O'Toole, and we visited just briefly about some of the other items that were included in your packet today regarding the transfer of funds, which was really about it. And I don't think we really covered anything of substance. So without a recording, I would bore you to death with some of the details that occurred. Nothing of relevance.
Very good. Thank you. I would just say that, Mayor Huthers has started us off on a really good foot talking about open communication. I think that we have to do our part here as a council and communicating with the administration and each other. And I would hope that that's a good tradition that we'll all start, and that way I just see a good relationship for all of us, the admin, the council, and the council people between each other as well. So, thank you,
Okay,
Mr.
very
Chair.
good. Any other open discussion items?
I do have a couple.
Okay.
I know you're surprised. I just wanted to remind viewers about Channel 16, and I know I've told some of you guys I've been downloading some of the programs onto my iPod. Of course, I had to have a tutorial from my 14-year-old to do it, but once you do that, you can actually watch like Fire Call and the Public Works TV and all those kinds of things. You can watch that stuff, keep up on the information, other things that are going on in the city. Really good stuff. Then the other thing, two things I want to challenge the council to. One is the mayor's looking for volunteers for the 4th of July celebration, and I thought we as a council might want to participate in that. Might be a fun thing to do. And the other thing I would like to challenge you to think about is the council and staff taking on a project like serving the banquet, maybe one of our open Monday evenings or something like that. And so I just want to plant that seed in your head, and I will follow up on it later, but I wanted you to think about it. So thank you.
Okay, anybody else? All right, seeing none, we'll move along here with our presentations. We have Jill Franken here talking about health license fees.
Good afternoon, Jill Franken, Assistant Health Director. We would like to just share with you a little bit of history on our health fees that are in Chapter 23. We have been working on these fees for the last about 3 years. The goal that we came up with back in 2008 was to really look at annually increasing license and permit fees to cover the cost of licensing and inspection process and to be comparable to the region. The history of this goes back, in 2008, we reviewed the fee structure that we have in Chapter 23. What we found was that it had been quite a few years since we had updated those fees and really done a good analysis of them. And so with that, we also found that in looking at those fees, that they were still quite low, and so started looking at comparing ourselves to what's going on in the region. Both what's in some ordinance as well as what are the actual fees that other cities like us or similar to Sioux Falls have in their ordinance. And so what we found when we did that, we looked at Fargo, Mankato, Albert Lee, some of those types of cities, and we found that our fees were very low and that the trend, at least nationally, and as well we saw that regionally when we talked to some people, was that they're really trying to have their fees cover the cost of the work that's being done with licensing and inspection process. So with that, we started looking at some formulas, some ways that we could accomplish that, come up with some fair and equitable ways of being able to set those fees and come up with a process that can gradually increase those to be able to cover what our expenses are. And we looked at somewhere between a 3 and a 5 year process for accomplishing that. Knew that if we tried to just jump those fees immediately, that would be a burden on those folks that are applying for those licenses and permits. And so we came up with a formula that would cover over the few years here, starting in 2009, to help provide that alignment that we were looking for. We also, to add to that, part of what we earn in revenue for the City of Sioux Falls to do this work is a reversion of the state licenses that they issue to the folks in Sioux Falls that have restaurants and grocery stores, et cetera. And so what we did is incorporated that as well into our formula so that that reversion of fees that's coming back to Sioux Falls is also taken into consideration when we look at what we need to be earning for revenue. So we are recommending today to continue with planned increases, and I think you all have that before you, the chart that I put before you. We're looking at a planned increase again this year. The first year we had a fairly dramatic increase in those fees in 2009. Last year it was a 20% increase, and some of that is due to a few factors that we look at. But this year, again, we're looking at a 20% increase. So you can see what we have currently for our fees and what we're proposing for the fees that will be, or for the licenses we'll be issuing for 2011. You can see how we break down our sizes of our restaurants as well as grocery. And then I also added the additional fees that are in Chapter 23 for health and what we would be recommending for those as well. There's a couple in here. The temporary events, tattoo establishment, and tattoo artists, those will all go up by 20%. You'll notice there's a couple of I would say they're probably considered incidental or smaller fees for the licenses we issue to hospital, convalescent homes, as well as pest control operators. We did not put them into the mix of looking at those increases. They're very small. We don't do the same type of work with them when we license them as we do the others. And so we recommend just going from 10 this year to 20, and then we'll look again at that fee to see what seems equitable and reasonable to be charging them for those licenses that we issue. So that's what we're recommending this year. Some of the things that we consider when we're looking at how to set those fees is we look at the number of licenses and permits issued. So every year we take those categories that we look at and we look at how many have we been issuing. Has it gone up? Has it gone down? Because that all will have a factor to play in whether or not how far we're increasing our fees, what percent we'll be recommending. We also look at any new fees we added to the ordinance. Last year we added a city temporary event fee, and then we also added a reinspection fee. And so those revenues that come in can also help offset the cost of licensing and inspection. And then we also continue to look at regional and national trends to see what's going on in other communities that have restaurants and groceries similar to ours. And then we'll take that into consideration as well. And then lastly, we also look at what are our expenses. How are our expenses going up? Have we had to add additional staff at some point or additional hours to that particular process? And then with that considered, we take a look as well. We have revenue estimates for 2011. We're estimating that city fee revenue will bring in about $172,000 in fees, and then the state reversion should bring right around $120,000. So that's will give us a total in 2011 for revenue of $292,000. We've been able to be pretty close to what we've estimated based on our trending of number of licenses that we issue, so I feel pretty good about that number. And then our costs that we look at, and we consider things such as if we're going to be doing COLAs and other costs of some of our IT support or, like software, things like that. And those costs are for salary benefits, supplies, IT, vehicles, fuel, some of those kinds of expenses. What's excluded is fixed building costs. Those that's $349,500. And I'll email this to you so that you can have a chance to take a look at what our anticipated revenue and expenses are. So you have this for 2011. You have $292,000 in revenue that we're expecting and $349,000 in expenses. So you say to yourself, well, you're still not there. And that's because we will need to look at, in the next couple of years, we're hoping by 2014, at the latest, we'll be matching our revenue and expenses and keep that in mind. But as you can appreciate, a 20% increase is still really significant for some of our folks, and so we want to be reasonable and yet make sure that we're making the adjustments that we need to over a graduated period of time. That is, in a nutshell, what I have for you. Does anyone have any questions?
Any questions for Joe? Mr. Litz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Joe and I'm kind of just looking at that chart, and it says hospital, convalescent home, $10 to $20. Is the whole hospital $20, or is that can you elucidate a little bit on that?
The state does the inspections for the hospitals and the convalescent homes. That's just simply to license from the state ordinance. It's a very old ordinance, and I don't know if, Luann, you want to come up and just talk about that, but it's really very much in a nutshell, licensing the facility, tracking who has convalescent homes and who are the hospital entities, and just making sure that we're paying attention to those things. And we do other inspections for them. We do food inspections for their food service and other types of inspections. This is just one category that we also have as well. There's only, I want to say, obviously, I think there's like 6 hospitals. We have maybe 10 convalescent homes and half a dozen pest control operators, somewhere in that range.
Okay, but then what I'm hearing you say is this is more or less an administrative fee to maybe just do some, I hate to minimalize paperwork, but just to register it. What I'm getting at is, I'm looking at the tattoo establishment and the tattoo artist, almost $200 for their place, and then a hospital's $20. You know, on the face of it, it just seems a little.
We do have significant ordinance in how we, what tattoo artists and establishments have to comply with in ordinance, and so we inspect based on that. So we do have quite a bit that when we go in and inspect them, what we're looking for and what we're accomplishing. So it's really, that's, what we did was we looked at all those different types of workloads, and we took and developed sort of an hour of workload. How much does it take to do an hour of work? And then we applied, based on all of these different types of licenses, we applied that. And so we said, does that particular type of inspection, is that 1.5 workloads? Is that 2 workloads? Is it 1? And then we put a dollar figure to that particular, for that particular workload unit. So tried to be fair and balanced in how we.
Seems fair enough. So.
Yeah.
I would also imagine that the hospitals undergo federal inspections, statewide inspections, and
yes,
okay,
yes.
Councilor Anderson.
I've seen an increase of the mobile vendors here this summer. Have you guys seen an increase in licensing for that? And how are we monitoring these mobile vendors, because they're moving around so much, of course?
I'm going to ask Luann to come up and answer that question.
Hello, I am Luann Ford. I'm Public Health Manager with the Health Department. So you're seeing an increase in the number of mobile units? Or?
Yes. Especially this year, I've seen probably 4 or 5 new vendors out there that are selling food and everything. I haven't stopped and checked on any of them, but I guess I thought I'd ask that question since we had you guys here.
Sure. A mobile food service is pretty much a commercial kitchen on wheels. And so they do hold a state food license as well as a city operating permit. And if they are licensed within the city limits of Sioux Falls, you can guarantee that they have at least 2 food service inspections a year. If they are coming into Sioux Falls from outside the city limits, then we will inspect them while they're inside the city limits, but the number of inspections that they get is out of our control as they leave the city.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Maybe one, if I could, Jill and Luann. When you're going to email us some new information on some estimates and projections, right?
What I would like to share with you that I just put together were the regional comparisons. I thought that might be helpful if I can email that to you, as well as what I just shared on the anticipated revenue versus expenses for 2011. So I'll send that in an email.
If you could maybe think in a new form for us, a new way. Think of how we're looking at this, thinking back a few years, how these rates have gone and changed, the number of establishments, the number of places that you visit each year, how they've grown.
Okay.
And, I think there's, 57,000 budget shortfall, essentially. Is there any way to, instead of raising those fees, to close that gap? Is there any other service or expenses that we could reduce to close the gap the other way? Instead of just thinking how the fees raised would close that gap, let's just turn around a little bit and think of how maybe there's services that maybe are duplicated or don't need to be provided. Just help us along that process. Give us some trending information and summary information on all those expenses that you gave us, estimated shortfall. Just do a little more. Help us understand this process better and look at it a bigger picture, maybe,
Okay.
if you could.
If I could also add that much of what we do in licensing and permitting is educational, along with the inspecting process.
Sure.
We do. That's a big part of us being able to keep our food establishment safe, and that you can go and have a good experience when you go to any place in the city to have a good meal or to go for your groceries. One of our goals that we also provide from a quality standpoint is trying to minimize foodborne illness. It's been over 5 years since we've had a foodborne illness in Sioux Falls, which we feel very good about. And would like to keep our scores that are greater than 85 at about 90%. Of those inspections that we do, and we've been between 85 and 90 most in the last 2 years. But our goal is always to be above 90% or 90% or greater. So that's another piece of what we do to help. A lot of what you see us do is hopefully preventing and protecting the community rather than having to deal with an illness, a foodborne illness, after it occurs. So, but I will certainly will look at that and.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Anderson.
Yeah, I was just going to add on, I think maybe like last year, you guys gave us a presentation with a lot of that information in it also. So I think I do remember that. You were talking about raising the fees at that time. Is this going to be, over like a 5-year to bring it up to where they're actually paying for the services?
Correct. It's our goal that by 2014, we would have fees aligned with our expenses. Yes.
Okay, well, thank you. All right, we'll move on to the exciting one for the evening with Mark Cotter. Mark, you've got about 10 minutes.
All right, good afternoon, and we will need a little bit more than 10 minutes, Counselor. I'm Mark Cotter. I'm with the Office of Public Works, and tonight I have the pleasure to bring you the work that's been done with our team that stretches almost every division, and we also utilize some of the top rate consultants in the region to analyze the utility rates annually. Just a piece of history, for the past 4 years, we've brought these rates to you as a package. That was a request of the City Council because we were to a point where we would finish a rate analysis and then bring it to the City Council. We'd finish the next one, bring it. This does become somewhat of a marathon presentation tonight, but what it does allow you to do is to see all the impacts of all the enterprise funds that Public Works manages, and because many of the same customers are affected across all boards. The other benefit for the new counselors that we do this early in the year, because these rates do not go into effect till January 1 of 2011, is that we want to make sure that the budget that the mayor provides you has the predicted revenues and the predicted expenses for these respective utility funds. I will tell you this is a combined effort of the Finance Department, Public Works Department, and again, AE2S, DGR, and R.W. Beck Consultants. The schedule that you see is tonight is informational purposes only. The first reading would be next Monday, and the second reading would be on the following Monday on June 21st. This year's approach stays consistent with cost of service rate adjustments, which essentially means that there's two key steps as we go through these analysis each year. The models are very robust. They've got a lot of key drivers that we analyze, but essentially it comes down to two key points. We look at what the revenues are required to run the utilities from an operations, maintenance, capital improvements, and debt retirement standpoint. And then the second step is we look at what proportionate share each respective customer class has with those costs, and we charge the respective customer class their proportionate share. And so that's why you see it's cost of service rate approach by customer class. This approach allows us to recommend to you the minimum recommended increase each year that allows us to still operate the enterprise funds, but also to maintain responsible reserve targets. One of the key things we've done now for the last 2 years, just with the change in the national economy and our local economy, is that we've tiered down our growth rates in several areas, but we've also recognized that whether it's recycling at the landfill or water conservation, that those volume changes have also impacted the revenues that have come in. You're going to hear a lot tonight about some past capital improvements and future. We would just offer that if you're interested, we would coordinate facility tours so you can not only see the operations, but also some of the key capital improvements that are in place. Tonight, we'll go through the analysis in this order. We'll start with light and power, then sanitary landfill. If we get to a point that you'd like to take a break, we can certainly do that. Water reclamation then will come, water purification, and then streets and utilities That's just a key procedural step that each year we need to do. We're not recommending a rate increase for the frontage fee, but we do have a resolution that we need to pass that allows us to charge the frontage fee each year. I think our goal, after you go through these detailed presentations, is our goal is to answer a lot of your questions. If you still have questions, there's time at the end of each presentation, and if we can't answer them today, we'll follow up with a memo. I won't go through, just to streamline the introductions, we'll have the presenters self-introduce, but to start with, Blair Metzger from DGR is our rate consultant for Light and Power, and Mike Burkhart is our light superintendent. He's the division manager in Public Works. And I'll invite them to the podium. Blair and Mike.
Okay, again, I'm Blair Metzger with DGR Engineers. Talk about the light department tonight. First of all, I thought we'd talk a little bit about what the light department is. It's a little bit of a unique animal as far as utilities in the community here. First of all, it serves customers in a defined area or service territory. I'll show you the map in a second here what that looks like, but there's only 2,600 customers, so it's very small as compared to the rest of the utilities we'll talk about tonight. The 10 largest customers you can see there are shown, water purification plant being the largest single customer. They serve a number of the school buildings. In total, makes it the second largest customer by consumption. And then you see the rest of them there. The interesting thing is about half of the electricity that's distributed by the light department is for public entities, meaning federal, state, city, or school facilities. The other thing that they do, the light department does, is, and it's a very important part, is they maintain all the streetlights in the community. So it's a very major function of what they do. But what I'm talking about here are the rates to the retail customers. As I mentioned a minute ago, there's a service territory law in the state, as it is in all states, where electric utilities serve a given customer base in a certain location. This is kind of a small map, but if you can see the green section of the map, that's the service territory of the light department. Majority of the area of the community is served by XL Energy, but there's also a couple of cooperatives that serve customers in the outlying areas, including Sioux Valley Energy on the north and east and west sides, and then Southeastern Co-op on the south side. So there's actually 4 different electric providers serving customers in the city of Sioux Falls. And so the light department is the green portion up by the airport and in the north of downtown area. And so they have a pretty small piece of the puzzle here, but yet it's a pretty significant utility if you compare it to other municipal utilities. The next thing I want to talk about quickly is the power supply. What the light department does is it's a reseller of electricity. In other words, they purchase it from providers and turn around and resell it on a retail basis. About half, just under half of the electricity that the light department purchases for resale comes from the Western Area Power Administration, which owns and operates the dams in the Missouri River, and it's hydropower. The rest of it's provided by Heartland Consumers Power District, which is located in Madison, and the two of them together then provide all the power that is resold to the customers of the light department. The interesting thing about this graph, among other things, is if you compare the hydropower and the wind power, if you add them up, it's over half of the power provided to the customers of the light department can be considered renewable. Part of it's hydro, part of it's wind. So it's kind of interesting. As the whole world goes toward green power, it gives the light department something to tout. The other types of power are just part of the Heartland mix, coal, nuclear, and other types of generation. Touch quickly on some recent capital expenditures and future planned expenditures. Mike would know the details better than I would, but in the past couple years there was a major substation project where a transformer was added. In addition to that, there's been some work in the Uptown development area. Circuit number 10 was constructed as well. Going forward, there's some other capital expenditures. None of these are huge in the scope of the community, but they are fairly large in the context of the light department. Going forward, there's a circuit tie for the downtown area. Circuit 11 and 12, which are 2 new circuits out of the substation, are proposed, as well as converting some overhead line to underground. So from a financial or fiscal basis, the next graph here shows how the light department has done in 2009, which is the last fiscal year it's completed. As mentioned earlier, the economy has had some impact on almost all businesses, including the light department's revenues. There was a drop in 2009. The first set of bars there over to the left, it dropped by $450,000 in revenue, part of which was because of the economy, and I think part was because of the cool summer we had last year. If you go over a couple to the middle of the chart there, you'll notice, though, that the operating expenses also dropped significantly, which is a good thing. It dropped over $1 million compared to budget. And so looking at the far right set of bars there, you'll see the unrestricted cash balance actually went up in 2009. So that was a good thing. The expenses decreased by more than the revenue decreased. So as it turned out, it was actually a good year. So the cash balance increased to a level considerably higher than what we had thought it would be in 2009. The other thing that we talk about every year when we come here is power supply costs, and as I've mentioned in the past, and is the case again, power supply, or the purchase of power from the people that provide the light department the power to resell, is 63% of all the costs. So everything else pales in comparison. You can see this in the pie chart here. The biggest piece of that pie is the power supply cost, and so what happens with power supply makes almost all the difference in what happens with rates. And as you can see, the other ones are all fairly small. So power supply is a huge part of that. The next chart that I have in here shows that in more detail. The power supply cost for the last 6 years, the bars in the chart show what's happened over the past 6 years. A couple things to notice, again, is the fact that power supply cost is by far and away the biggest individual piece of cost, but it's also increasing the most, which is a kind of a double whammy and not a good thing. But so when we talk about rate increases, this is what drives a lot of the rate increases. So what is our plan? Well, as Mark mentioned, we do two different things here. We look at what we need for revenue requirements. In other words, how much income or revenue we have to make the thing stay afloat and to cover all of its obligations. And then we also this year did another routine or more detail on cost of service between the different rate classes. So first of all, on the topic of overall revenues, the first thing that we came up with, or the results of that, came up with an increase of 8% in total revenue per energy unit sold. So in other words, if we did it on a straight across-the-board basis, it's 8% increase. However, I'm going to talk a little bit more later, because of the cost of service study, the differences among the rate classes will vary off of that 8%. So in total, it's an 8% increase, but some classes will see more, some will see less, and I'll talk about that in a second. Part of the good news is, I guess, last year at this time we were looking forward to 2011, and we thought it was going to take a 10% increase, so I guess from that perspective, 8% is not as bad as what we thought it was going to be. The next chart here shows in some detail the reserves, or the cash position of the utility at the end of the fiscal year, both historical and projected. The red line, or with the diamonds on it, there is the target that we want to try to maintain. We set a goal a few years back of 90 days worth of operating expenses in our reserves, which is we believe a prudent amount. And as you can see, in 2007 and 2008, we did not hit that, the green bar being actual reserves. But in 2009, as I mentioned earlier, we had a very good year cash-wise, and it actually ended up exceeding our target. In 2010, we're expecting it to drop some. Last year, if you recall, we made an increase of a few percent, which was lower than we thought it needed to be, but we did that because of the economy being what it was a year ago, in the hopes that we would not hit the customers any harder than we had to. So we expect it to drop this year. We're taking a little bit of a drop in 2011, even with the rate increase. But again, we're getting close to where we need to be. It's about $2 million, or plus or minus, is what our reserve amount is. And so we're fairly close to where we need to be, and we're going to try to keep it there. The additional revenue that we intend to raise with the overall average of 8% increase is about $700,000, and what we're going to do with that is we're going to, number one, pay for additional operating expenses, again, the largest part being some power supply cost increases. Capital expenses are anticipated to go up a slight amount, and then to keep our reserves where they need to be, where we want them to be, so that they don't fall to where they were, we need an additional amount for that as well. So those three added together all come up to be about $700,000 of additional revenue that our planned increase would generate. So what does this all mean? As I mentioned earlier, we did a cost of service study. What a cost of service study does is it tries to identify which rate class should be paying how much of the total overall revenues for the utility. I've listed here the three of the major revenue classes, that being residential, small commercial, and large commercial, which just describe different types of customers. You can see here that the average bills are shown there, and then we're showing what the additional revenue or the additional rate increase will do to each customer. So the residential, for example, we're showing about a 9.4% increase. Again, the average is 8, so theirs is a little bit higher than average. Again, driven by what our cost of service study shows it should be. That ends up being about $4.41 a month additional for the residential customers. Again, there aren't a lot of them, relatively speaking, but to those that you do serve, it would be that amount. Small commercial actually sees a decline of about 4% for the average customer. That'll vary based on their usage to some extent, but currently the rates that are currently in place show that they're being charged a slight amount more than they should be, so they're going to see a decline of a little bit. And then the large commercial class, I show two different customer types there. One I call a good load factor, which means they're efficient user of electricity, and then the average load factor, which is just a typical customer. Again, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to send the signal to people to be a good user of electricity, to be efficient, to not use more than they should, and so forth. And so the signal we're sending here, if you're a good, efficient user, you're actually going to see a slight decrease here. However, for those that aren't quite as good, you're going to see an increase. What I call an average load factor is going to see about 11% increase, so slightly higher again than average.
Can we go back to that?
Certainly.
I don't know about anybody else. But somehow that doesn't sit right. That didn't make sense to. First of all, where are the when you split up the map, the residential have got to be north end.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
That answers one of my questions. Two, small commercial, you're gonna lower their rates, and in 2 years you're gonna make them catch up again because they'll be behind.
Well, I don't know if that's true. I don't think so.
You don't?
I think going forward, what we did is we did a rate study 5 years ago, roughly, and did a cost of service study then. And then from then on, we increased the rates every class by the same amount for the last few years.
Okay.
Now we look at it again because what
broke
happened
them
was, and we're getting them to where they should be. And then going forward, if there are increases, we would intend to keep them all the same.
The
class
jumps?
Yes. So let's say next year is a 2% increase. Every class will get the same 2% increase. And I don't anticipate that changing until we see something different in the signal you get from your power suppliers, which is really what drives this. So this is trying to get them to where they should be based on the current cost structure.
But aren't they gonna? If 5 years ago they were right, now they're off. Isn't 5 years ago you're gonna have to do the same thing again? So wouldn't it be better to do that to get the study every year and increase each one of them instead of each one of them uniformly, one at 3%, one at 4%, and one at 1%?
Yeah, I think generally speaking we try to do that. Yes.
Okay.
But what happened between then and now, just to bring you a little history here, is back then when we did this, your supplemental power supplier was Xcel Energy, actually sold you wholesale power. Now it's Heartland, and their structures are completely different.
Okay.
They're what they charge you. So that's why we decided this year to do this and look at it again to get it to fit that.
In line?
In line. And so now going forward, unless something major changes, I would anticipate we could go forward the same increases going forward. Once we get these changes made and we get it to where we think it should be based on our cost of service.
Okay. Something just doesn't feel right here, but I'll listen.
Okay. Well, yeah, if there's somebody else. Yes.
Blair, a question on the large commercial average load factor. I don't see the slide, but most of the buildings are government-run buildings, is that right?
A lot of them are.
Commercial?
I don't know that, I think in that class, I wouldn't say the majority are government, but some of them are.
Would a school fall as a average load factor, or are they a good load factor?
They'd be an average load factor.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
What do we
Load
get?
factor means the ratio between their peak usage and the continuous usage is a good way to explain it. So in other words, somebody that turns something on and leaves it on all day is a good user, because they're using all of the capacity, if you will, that you've provided them. For example, a convenience store or grocery store, they turn on all their coolers or whatever, and it's on all day. A poor load factor would be like a church, would be a prime example. It's on for a few hours on Sunday morning, and that's all it's on for. So if you kind of think of those two extremes, and the school is kind of somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
They're there, some hours during the day, but not overnight and things like that. So,
Okay. Very good.
okay. To take a quick look at what this means as to how the rates would compare with area utilities, this is kind of useful in terms of looking at how you compare with others. I did a comparison with Sioux Valley Energy as well as Xcel, who are two of your neighbors that serve the part of the load in the community. Just to go through it real quickly, the residential rates will be real close to what Sioux Valley and a little less than what Xcel charges. Small commercial is a little more variability, even though we're lowering the rate for the average customer, is still a little bit higher than the other two. And large commercial for a good load factor is kind of right in the middle between Sioux Valley and Xcel. And it's hard to make a real good comparison because there's so many things that come into play here. There's fuel charges and other things that Xcel passes on every month that vary, and there's lots of. It's really difficult to make a real good comparison, but this gives you some idea and some comfort to know that it's right in the ballpark. My last slide talks about what I think the future is going to be. Hopefully, if we're right about this, the rates should stay pretty stable. In fact, at this point, I don't have an increase shown for the next couple of years if things go like we think they're going to go, and then a small increase in 2014 and 2015 of a couple percent. So hopefully we're over the hump of getting to some of the big increases out of the way. The big caveat there in caps and bold is if we get federal legislation, the cap and trade or any sort of carbon tax, if that happens, all bets are off and we have big increases and everybody sees those. And I don't know if that's going to happen. Probably less of a chance today than there was a year ago, but we don't know. So that was real quick, the work that's been done so far. Any further questions I could try to answer?
Councilor Aguilar?
I'm sorry I missed it. How often is the cost of service study done?
The last one was done about 5 years ago. I don't remember exactly the year. I think it was 2006, I believe. And that's something that is kind of a judgment call. It doesn't need to be done every year, but it should be done when things change. In this case, we changed power supplier. So that changed the structure of the cost, and so then we thought it was worth doing.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, how often do you then change providers? Or is that bid out?
No, that's a long-term contract. I'm trying to remember a 35-year contract now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was a short-term thing. There was a time when it was a good idea to do that, but that's all changed. The whole power supply world has changed, and it's brutal if you're out there in the market. So the decision was made 3-4 years ago to go with Heartland and stay with them long-term. So
Okay.
that should stay pretty consistent.
Earlier, you showed a chart that showed the different sources of our energy. It said like 46.9 was hydropower.
Yeah.
Out of those sources, which one is the most expensive, and have we looked at trying to reduce any of these costs in the future?
The long and the short of it is you're going to pay whatever those people charge you, and there really isn't much you can do here as far as changing the costs that they charge you. The least expensive is hydro, which is a good thing, so it's good that half of your power is hydro. Again, that comes from the federal government, Western Area Power Administration. Heartland is kind of a bundled, you get charged a bundled rate, and they have all these power supply types in that, and as far as what's the most expensive, when you get to natural gas or to diesel, those kind of things that cover peak power. That's the most expensive. Coal, nuclear is the least expensive non-hydro power.
Then, just like with the wind energy, where are we picking up wind energy from?
Heartland, your supplemental power
Heartland's doing
supplier,
that too?
owns part of a wind, or takes deliveries from part of a wind farm out by Wessington Springs. It was just built a year or so ago, and that's part of their power supply mix, and so you get part of that power.
Thank you.
Yep.
Say, Blair or Mike, could you just remind us why again that the city has this power plant? Why is it that we're even in the business?
I think it's, well, first of all, it was something that's been around for an awful long time. It's been there nearly forever. There was a time when both Xcel and the city, I believe, served customers, and they would compete for them. In the 70s, there were service territories set up so that you not only have a territory that you get to serve, but you also have an obligation to serve. And this also then gives you access to the Western Area Power Administration power. You can get the hydropower, which is really inexpensive. If you were not a municipal, you could not get that. And so that's one of the primary reasons. Plus, the other thing I always think about when I think about this is that it also gives you a crew and equipment to do your streetlight maintenance throughout the whole community, and to have them do that, and they can do that at much less cost than if you had to contract that out.
Okay.
Councilor Anderson.
One other question, I guess. How many total customers do we have in the 4 categories?
2,600, I think, is the total. And you mean how many are in each category?
No, I just want total
Yeah,
number. That was
2,600.
fine.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else, Blair? Good? Okay. Move on to the landfill.
All right, we'll try to keep it rolling here. Dave McElroy, Landfill Superintendent. With me tonight, we got Matt Evans, the engineer with R.W. Beck. R.W. Beck has done the rate studies for the landfill for about the last 5 years. I hope you guys will be able to coordinate something, as Mark indicated, take a tour of the landfill, because landfills really are cool, and we have a nice modern landfill here in Sioux Falls. With that, I'll give you Matt.
Thanks, Dave. Again, Matt Evans with R.W. Beck. I'd like to begin with a little bit of background on the landfill division. The landfill itself serves a 5-county region, Lake, Lincoln, McCook, Minnehaha, and Turner counties. It services approximately 245,000 people, and it is located about 7 miles west of Sioux Falls on 41st Street. Under the landfill division, there is also the HHW building. That's the Household Hazardous Waste Facility. You can see it on the map there. It's located within the city limits on Cliff Avenue and Chamber Street near the city street department. Now, out at the landfill, there are 2 primary types of waste that are disposed of there. There's municipal solid waste, and there's construction and demolition debris. Municipal solid waste, that's your household garbage, your commercial business garbage, industrial waste. And on a normal year, about 180,000 tons of municipal solid waste, MSW, are received. In 2009, we received about 171,000 tons. That was about 5% less than what we budgeted for. Construction and demolition debris, that's wood, concrete, drywall, materials from construction projects. And on a normal year, we expect about 60,000 tons of construction and demolition debris. Last year, about 50,000 tons were received, and that was about 12% less than what was budgeted. The 2 factors that went into these, or the 2 primary factors that went into these reductions in waste received, we believe are just the economic downturn, and then also with MSW, recycling had impact. As you can see on the next slide, talk about sustainability. A few years back, the City of Sioux Falls took on kind of a sustainability initiative, and you can see some of the benefits of that initiative here. On the left, you can see the generation rate, the amount of garbage disposed of per person has gone down over the last few years. And then on the right side, you can see recycling is going up. And within the sustainability initiative, there is the Household Hazardous Waste Facility, there's recycling at the landfill, and also there's the sustainability program which Amy Ladonsky is the sustainability coordinator, which she heads up. Now, briefly, I'll talk a little bit about some of the capital improvement projects that have happened here over the last few years. The first is the landfill gas pipeline project to Poet. It finished up early in 2009. We collect the gas out at the landfill. The gas at the landfill gas is generated as the garbage decomposes. It's about 50% methane. Poet uses that methane in place of using natural gas. So we collect the gas at the landfill, compress it, dry it, and then it's put into a pipeline, 11-mile pipeline over to Poet, where they use it in one of their solid fuel boilers. And the project has received some national attention. It's received a couple of awards. It received the U.S. EPA Landfill Methane Outreach Program Award this past year, and also the SWANA Landfill Gas Utilization Award. SWANA is Solid Waste Association of North America. A few other projects that have been completed recently. Leachate Pond 2 construction. Leachate is the water that we collect from the bottom of the landfill and manage and then gets disposed of at the wastewater treatment facility. Landfill gas well field expansion. That's just putting more wells in for the collection of gas for the pipeline project. Cell 2 construction, that's another cell where we're going to be putting waste in the future. And then pre-subtitle D closure, that's a cap of an older unlined portion of the landfill. That was just one area of that closure that is being done in several phases. Looking forward at future capital improvement projects, we have another cell construction coming up in 2013. That's the big project coming up. Landfill gas well field expansion, expand the compressor system that is used for the pipeline project. Another phase of the cap closure of the older unlined cell, that's coming up, another pond construction. And then in 2011, there's the Household Hazardous Waste Facility Sustainability Education Center proposed to be constructed, or planned to be constructed. All right, so to look back at 2009 and the financials of that for that past year, revenues were slightly under what we expected, and our capital expenses were slightly more, but those were offset by the good management of the operating expenses, which resulted in a net positive, or being in the black at the end of the year, a few $1,000s. To talk about the tipping fee model, several assumptions that we had to make, or estimates that we had to make with regards to future waste revenues. The first was in 2010. This year we're projecting about a 2% decrease in waste received, or waste revenues received, compared to last year. So that's 2% less from the year that we already saw a pretty dramatic downturn in revenues. Then starting in 2011, we're thinking it's coming back, or that's what our assumption, and so it'll be about the same as last year. And then going forward after that, our assumption is about a 1% increase in waste revenues per year starting in 2012. Looking at our projections for revenues in 2011, the large part of our revenues come from MSW tonnage. That's about 54%. Landfill gas sales to Poet, they do pay us for the gas that we're giving them, make up about 19%. And then you can see C&D tonnage, other revenues received at the landfill, carbon credits revenues, and interest. And carbon credits, we do get some money. The city does get some money for the destruction of methane. It is seen as an offset credit, and as long as this is not a regulatory compelled gas collection system, it is eligible for carbon credits. As far as projected expenses in 2011, 2011 is a relatively light year for capital expenses, so the O&M expenses make up the large part of the expenses in 2011. There's about 12%, there's 11% for capital improvement projects, in an unrestricted category and 1% in a restricted category, as you can see there. We also have loan payments at 6% and other capital, other capital equipment purchases at 2%. Now I'm going to look a little bit more at the CIP expenses for 2011. Again, it's a relatively light year. Last year, 2009, was about a $9 million capital improvement project year. So you can see this is quite a bit less than that in 2011. And also the next big year coming up for projects out at the landfill is when we construct Cell 3, which is in 2013. That year it's going to be closer to about $6 million for capital expenses. So a lot of big projects from year to year, kind of ups and downs in capital expenses. With regards to debt tracking, currently the landfill has about $3.5 million worth of debt. And you can see here the plan to pay it back over the next 10 years. All the loans here are from the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. They're relatively low-interest loans, and they were taken to really help balance those capital improvement projects, those up and downs years, so that the rate increases wouldn't be as dramatic. One thing we look at with regards to tipping in the tipping fee analysis is our reserve targets. We have two funds that we're required to have, or one, I guess, that we're required to have. That's the restricted reserve. That's a fund that the state requires us to have. It's money set aside for the closure of the landfill and then the management of the landfill after it's closed. The state wants to be sure that every landfill in the state has some money set aside, so when the day does come to close the doors, there's money there to take care of it. So that's one of the reserve balances that we're required to have, and it's based on the amount of capacity of landfill remaining as well as the estimated closure and post-closure costs. Then the unrestricted balance is the money that's used for everything else besides closure activities, other capital projects as well as operating expenses. And the target for that project is about 6 months of reserve for that account, and that covers contingency action scenarios as well as downturns in revenues. So how are we looking with our cash reserves? First, to kind of look at the restricted cash balance, that's the center bar, the blue bar, and the target is the blue line with the circles. You can see there that's the account that we're required to have, that we have to meet the state requirements there. So we meet that one, and then with our unrestricted, our target, you can see this year as well as 2013, 2014, and 2015, we're under where we'd like to be. The target is the green line with the squares, and the left bar with the green left bar is what the balance is projected for those years. And then you can see the total budget in yellow, and then also our projected rate adjustments are in red, on the red line, the triangle line there. So to look at our rate increase and why we're proposing a rate increase, the MSW increase is necessary to fund large upcoming capital projects, especially the Cell 3 construction project, which is in 2013. That's a $6 million CIP year that I mentioned earlier. The landfill also has significant high fixed costs, such as large equipment that's needed to meet operating requirements. And so in order to meet or to offset the decreases in revenue due to the loss of tonnage, the landfill is proposing a $1 per ton increase for MSW. And then based on the projected waste tonnages, an additional $1 per ton for MSW for each additional year is also planned. This table here just kind of shows you the tipping fee, and the historical and the anticipated MSW rates. You can see the highlighted one is what we're proposing is the $1 increase from 2010 to 2011. And then what is the impact to the residential collection? We assume a current household collection rate of about $20 per month, and it should be noted that the City of Sioux Falls is not responsible for collecting and hauling the landfill, only the disposal of the garbage out at the landfill, the tipping fee. So the city, we don't know what the rates exactly are because everybody can choose their own hauler. So these are assumptions. But we do know, my company and myself know, based on other experience, that it's about a 30% to a third of the disposal fee is related to the actual disposal at the landfill. The remainder is the collection, the labor, the equipment, the fuel to get it out there. So a $1 increase would have the impact of taking a $20 residential bill up to $20.19 based on these assumptions. So for your information, just to show you how it fares with the rest of the region, Sioux Falls has some of the best rates in the region and will continue to have for municipal solid waste after the rate increases once the rate increase is put forth. And then with regards to C&D waste, City of Sioux Falls is more in the middle of C&D waste rates in the region, and we're not proposing an increase for C&D waste at this time. So in summary, the bottom line for 2011 for the sanitary landfill, we propose $1 per ton increase for municipal solid waste, $32 to $33, no change for the C&D fee, and then also we propose changing the way large electronics are paid for or to be disposed of out at the landfill. Currently, a customer can dispose of up to 3 large electronics at $10 per unit per day. We found that there's some taking advantage of that, and it's costly for the city to dispose of these, and so we'd like to change that to $1 per pound for large electronics. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Councilor Litz?
I noticed can you go back 7 or 8 slides there where you're talking about the rationales for some of the increases?
Yes. Just talk. Oh, is this?
Oh, okay, yes. It says up there, in order to offset decreases in revenue due to loss of tonnage, you're going to have $1 a ton increase, and then based on projected waste tonnages, an additional $1 a ton increase per year would be necessary to meet capital improvement budgets. Does that?
It's kind of confusing how it's worded there. Basically, $1 per ton this year, and then the last bullet's looking forward to would be 2012 and beyond. So that's $1 per ton. What it's saying is for future years after 2011, $1 per ton per year.
When your flow gets back to normal, is that the idea then? Would that be $2 or would you go back to the $1? I mean,
it would still be a $1 increase. I guess this here kind of this table here kind of just summarizes what the next slide. So it's just $1 per year. We're going to evaluate that every year because the waste tonnages coming in and received will vary. And then based on our assumptions, this is the rate increases that we would need.
okay. Yeah, I was just confused by the wordage up there.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, one more thing.
Yes.
Mr. McElroy, that was a very nice letter to the editor you had this morning, and if you could imagine, I've been reading letters to the editor here lately, but I'd like to thank you for stepping up and, doing the extra bit on your job there, so thank you.
Anybody else? Mr. Anderson?
On the capital projects that you've got scheduled for out there, the HHW building.
Mm-hmm.
Could you explain that a little bit more? Maybe Dave could help you on that.
Sure.
Exactly what that's going to entail and how that's going to service the community?
Yep, I'll let Dave.
Sure. What we've seen, as you may or may not be aware, is last year we started taking electronics full-time at the household hazardous waste facility. So back in 2004, when that facility was designed, it was only designed for household hazardous waste such as paints, solvents, and those kind of things. So we have expanded the services there, and we've probably, I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but it seems like our monthly totals were around 900 vehicles before we did that, and we're up to like 2,000, 2,100 vehicles. So we've greatly increased the usage of that facility, and we're busting at the seams, and there's some storage concerns. So that facility would be an expansion. There would be an education center where we'd be able to bring in community, like school children, teach them sustainable methods. We would also have some storage for the increased storage for the storage of electronic items or the latex paints, the really non-hazardous type of chemicals as well. And one thing that we are looking at, we have a grant application in to the South Dakota DENR. They don't only do loans, they also do grants. And I think we should find out within the next month if we're going to get a grant to help fund that capital improvement project as well.
Thank you.
Dave, the change in the fee for recyclable electronics, I guess.
Yep.
It's a $10 flat fee now, and then you're going to go to $1 per pound.
Yeah.
What's an average television weigh? And I'm just concerned about the impact
right.
that somebody's
and I do want to point out that that's really, we kind of had businesses that were taking advantage of us there. Residents can bring large electronics to the household hazardous waste facility for free. So we were coming in, they were bringing in 3 TVs conveniently because they knew what the ordinance allowed, that probably weigh usually typically the large, older, big screen, because people are now getting the newer HD TVs, and some of those are, I would guess 200, 300 pounds. So we'd charge $10 for them, and we'd have to pay probably $100 to $200 to dispose of them. So we felt we were getting taken advantage of, and so this will really discourage anyone from bringing electronics to the landfill. Electronics need to, if you're a resident, they need to be taken to the household hazardous waste facility for free, or if you're a business, you would need to dispose of your waste properly, and that would be like through Millennium Recycling or Advanced Recycling. And our proposed $1 per pound, nobody's going to want to come to us because they could take it to Millennium or Advanced for considerably less.
Go ahead.
I noticed that you had an increase in your 209 budget and then decreased it in 210, and now we're back up to what you figured was going to be your 210 income. Was that the way I read that? If we go back to that?
Which slide was that?
That was early. Yeah, you based it on a 2% increase to go to off of 209 to go to 210. Then you went back right to 209 revenues, and now then you're going to look at a 1% revenue increase beginning in 212 or 212 from 211. Where did you come up with those figures? Or swag method or?
We for the 2010, looking at what we're going to get this year, we looked at the end of last year, we looked at what we've gotten so far this month, or this year for the first few months. So that first bullet, it's a good estimate, it's our best estimate. We think it's a little bit conservative, but it's a 2% decrease in revenues this year compared to last year. So even down more this year, not knowing really where things are going to go. Then, assuming that things are going to turn around in the economy and we're going to start seeing more waste, because that's what happens when the economy turns around, or when that it's proportional to that, or it's related to that. Okay. We're estimating it'll come back to what 2009 was in 11, and then 1% thereafter. It's just kind of
is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, and that's true. Dave mentioned that we had seen some presentations on this topic. A lot of people are asking, people to look into a crystal ball and project what the waste. And this is what we've seen in some of the national presentations too by SWANA. That's the Solid Waste Association North of America. Similar to these kind of estimates.
That's the answer I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just a question out here, would you guys like to take a little break before we start the next one? 5-minute break. We'll start again at 5:30. Thank you. So a short little break. We'll get started again with water reclamation.
Hi, my name is Trent Lubers. I'm the superintendent of the Water Reclamation Division of Public Works. We're going to present to you our rate model and our proposed fee increases. We have with us today Steve Burrian with AE2S Engineering. He's been working on our rate model. He also has Nicole Cox with him. They have been working on our rate model for about the last 5 years. And I'll turn it over to Steve, and if you have any questions for me at the end, I'd be happy to answer them for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Trent. Councilor Jamison, members of the council. AE2S, as Trent indicated, has been working with both your water purification and your water reclamation utility since 2005 and 2016 rate studies. As Mark indicated earlier in his initial comments, that we focus on two things: making sure we have adequate revenue each year to run a prudent utility, as well as maintain equitable cost of service amongst the user classes. You've retained us since the original studies in 2005 and 2006 to help you with an annual assessment of where you stand, and in that we're obviously trying to achieve those same two objectives. The water reclamation utility is the one that collects all of the wastewater across the community, conveys that either through gravity pipelines, through pump stations, and ultimately force mains, and then brings that out to the wastewater reclamation facility. The map that we have before you this evening is just a quick snapshot of your utility. You have about 28 major lift stations throughout the community, and then a pretty expansive system that encompasses approximately 800 miles of pipe, ranging from 6 inches on the low side to 66 inches on the high side, and then some associated appurtenances that cover the entire community. As that water then is brought to the water reclamation facility, that facility was constructed in the 1980s. It's had a series of expansions and rehabilitations over the years. In its current capacity is rated at 21 million gallons per day. If you relate that, we'll see later, to the water purification utility, it's quite a bit less in rated capacity because you don't have all of the wastewater or all of the water that's pumped to the system doesn't always wind up back at the water reclamation facility. It is a primary, secondary, and tertiary treatment facility. I won't get into details, but by having tertiary treatment, that suggests that this is a very sophisticated facility that treats the water and returns to the Big Sioux River. And just for a kind of a sense for things, there's about 5.6 billion gallons of treated wastewater effluent that are returned to the Big Sioux River on an annual basis. I won't get into a lot of the details on the capital improvements, but because capital really drives this utility in terms of most of the rate increases that we need to have on an annual basis, I think it's worthy of just giving you some snapshots. What you see before you are 4 recent major capital improvements that have been done by the water reclamation utility. A couple of them are for growth, the East Side Sanitary Sewer System and its associated pipeline and pump stations, and then the Basin 13 improvements. And then you'll see some process pump improvements at the water reclamation facility. And the central main is actually a kind of a combined project where you're rehabilitating the central main in phases, but you're also increasing the diameter slightly to provide some capacity for future growth. If we look forward then to some of the future capital improvements, this can really be broken down into about 3 different chunks here. The first chunk is the continued rehabilitation and expansion of the central main for about $22 million. If you add the next 4 together, you can see kind of a new focus within the water reclamation facility of doing some major rehabilitation at the plant through a series of projects. And then if growth continues as expected toward the end of your capital improvements plan and within the planning horizon that I'm presenting this evening, you are planning to do a treatment facility out at the East Side Sanitary Sewer, so you'd have a satellite treatment plant. This $4.5 million represents only the land and acquisition and engineering for this particular facility. There's about another $25 million in bond-funded debt projected for 2017 if this project moves forward as anticipated. Each year, this is kind of our report card, we will present to you what we think is going to happen in the ensuing year, and then we will look back on what actually happened. And so we have 4 side-by-side bar graphs of operating revenue and operating income, other income, as well as operating expense and capital outlay, and then the resulting impact on your unrestricted cash account. I stress unrestricted in this particular utility. You do have a restricted account that was mandated in the old days by the Environmental Protection Agency. It can be only spent on specific improvements at the water reclamation facility, and I'm not tracking that within this current projection here. You can see in general that we had a little bit lower water sales with the trend for reduced water sales in the city of Sioux Falls, as well as the wet year last year. That resulted in a slightly lower operating revenue compared to projected. On the other income side, we also saw a similar decline in some of the cost recovery that you had within the community. And had you not had a transfer that I'll mention in a minute, we would have also seen a lower actual revenue to projected revenue in 9 as it relates to other income. However, because of those, that restricted fund, you'd done a series of restricted fund improvements over the years, and you transferred $3 million of eligible money from the restricted fund into your unrestricted fund, and so that resulted in a one-time gain in revenue under the other income category. You can see on the expense side that Trent and his staff did a very diligent job of controlling expenses. There's additional details that either Trent and I can answer, but you can see they saved considerable money on the operating side, and then their capital outlay was virtually similar to what we projected. And the net effect, primarily driven by that $3 million transfer from restricted fund, was a pretty significant increase in cash from projected in 2009 to actual. As we went to look forward then within the model, we had to do some updating. And the model in the past for water reclamation has always been a 5-year model. Given some of the major improvements on the horizon, you did elect to jump forward to a 10-year model that I'll be presenting this evening. But in terms of some of the updates that we always take the new operating budget and the new capital budget for 11 and hardwire that into the model as the projections for that particular year. Then because cost recovery can be a little bit fickle, we do update that. With the slower growth happening in Sioux Falls and I guess quite honestly across the country, we have been forced to lower some of those cost recovery projections in the near term. In addition, we have some debt that I highlight here, not so much because debt isn't routine to the utility, but because we did get some special debt this year or in the next year. That has to do with the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, or the stimulus bill. And so you can see if these particular 3 notes that we'll be taking out both had a 10% principal reduction, which is their fancy way of saying that we got a 10% grant that subsidized the cost a little bit. And then in addition, the interest rate, which is typically more 3 or a little bit north of 3, will be 2.25%, and so there's a net savings to the utility of about $1.4 million as a result of those 3 notes we're taking out. Then lastly, we did see, as I mentioned, a little bit lower water use in 2009 than was anticipated, and so in the model itself, we did downgrade the numbers in 2010 and beyond a little bit to reflect those adjustments that we saw. Looking forward, then, we always need to have a crystal ball, and when you go out 10 years, admittedly, that gets a little bit difficult. In past years, Sioux Falls was growing at a clip of well above 2% a year. That slowed down a little bit. In addition, we're seeing a very significant trend in reduced water usage. We think some of that's coming from conservation and some of the water pricing in the community. We think some of that's coming from some of the wet years that we've had. And so we had a special meeting just to discuss this. We looked internal to the community. We looked at what we're doing with some of our other regional clients that we have. And the net decision, I guess, was to put in a 1% annual growth rate in meters per year. We still are seeing growth in terms of housing and industry and meters, just not as much in terms of water sales. And then for water sales, we decided to flatline that for 11 and 12. And then beyond that, and admittedly some of this is a little bit of a guess, but beyond that, we felt that we would return the water use back to something more similar to the meter numbers for 2013 and beyond. And I'm talking about water because it's the only cash register that we have for water reclamation. The wastewater isn't billed. It's just based on what we buy from the water utility. And then on the O&M escalation side, we had to look at a series of things here. Admittedly, inflation in recent years has been quite stagnant. In fact, I think there was a year of negative inflation at one point in time. But as we see some of the things ramp up, these are the numbers that the industry is looking at, and so kind of 4 to 5% on general inflation in labor. Fuel is always a little bit higher in Sioux Falls and across the region, and so we bumped that up a tad. And then for whatever reason, if we were on the market, we're seeing very significant increases in both electricity and chemicals. We know that's a little bit of a draconian number, but if we look at the trend, it's well within the trend that we've been seeing, and so we put 10% a year for each of those categories. This is a breakdown, and this is a little different than some of the pie charts you've seen previously from the other utilities. This is not the total revenue requirements or all expenses and capital for the utility. This is simply a demonstration of just the operation and maintenance budget. And I think Blair showed you that it was about 50% purchase power for that particular, or more than 50% purchase power in that particular case. In our case, it's really labor that drives the cost of the water reclamation utility outside of capital. And so about 50% of the costs are labor, and then the other 50% is broken up by a series of other costs within the utility. The total operation and maintenance budget for next year is about $8.4 million. The other thing that's always prudent to track, and this is a new graphic that we haven't showed in the past, is one that we're trying to kind of get a handle on where debt has been and where debt is going. And so in the small green line, you see the principal and interest payments that are projected, either have taken place in 9 or projected in 10 and beyond. And the total debt is shown in the maroon bar. And so you can see the trend here is that the debt is actually decreasing here in recent years. It's going to go up a little bit in flat line for the midterm of our planning horizon, and then with the major East Side Sandy Sewer project on the horizon, they're anticipating that there'll be some pretty significant increases in debt in the out years. We've been asked time and time again, is this debt reasonable? We did do some evaluation, and your debt as a percentage of budget is about 34%. And there's no written, crisp number that one would like to have for that, but if you read some of the manuals that are out there, they suggest a range of somewhere between 30 and 60% for that debt range. And so currently we're at 34%. We're well on the low range of that recommendation across the country. In this particular utility, we maintain two essentially two pools of money. One is more of the checkbook, and it's the operating reserve. And like the first presentation of the evening, we do target 90 days of operating expense, and if we look at that for 2011, that's slightly over $2 million that we try to target for this particular utility. And then we also have a capital reserve. This is more of the unrestricted component of the water reclamation facility. And here we're targeting about 15% of the average annual CIP. We looked over a 5-year period, averaged that, and then took 15% of it, and that's very similar to our O&M reserve at about $2 million as well. This then is the graphic that tries to bring all of this together into one simple graphic. And I always quip, and it would be unfair if I don't do it this year, but Mark Cotter came up with kind of a way that he wanted to demonstrate all of this, and so we affectionately call this the Cotter graphic with some of our other communities that we have out there. This is also the only other the graphic that I have to apologize on. Due to a graphing error in 2009, the one that you may have in front of you that was distributed had $2.7 million less of dollars in the 2009 account than what we show on this one. The one I have in front of you is actually the updated version. We decided to commingle the unrestricted and the restricted by virtue of simplicity of presentation, and the net effect was we made a mistake in terms of how we graphed 2009, and so we made it simpler for you and harder for ourselves. But it did not cause any downstream impacts on 2010 and beyond, so it's truly just kind of a graphical presentation error for 2009. What we have is time across the bottom. We have dollars on the right side of the y-axis. I'll be an engineer, y-axis, and then on the left side and the right side, we have the percentage of rate increase for the residential customers. And so I think that in the previous one you saw, he showed the two reserves side by side. We've elected to stack them, just a little bit different presentation style. So that first set of squared lines is what we're trying to maintain for an operating reserve. And we fill that bucket up first. So you can see in all cases we're going to maintain that reserve. And then the next line is the combination of the restricted and unrestricted, or it's the capital improvements balance. And you can see historically we've had quite a bit of money in that account, and then we've been using that on a pretty steep progression moving forward, and that's why we've had these major rate increases that we've required, is because we had that big progression in cash usage. What you see here then is with some more inflationary type increases for residential starting in 11 at about 3% a year, we'll generate a little bit of extra cash over time, and then when the East Side Sanitary Sewer comes, we're planning to debt service that. We had to do some more significant increases in the out years of the planning horizon, and then drop that back to a little bit closer to inflationary. And in the last 2 years of the planning horizon, we were able to achieve that sweet spot where both of the operating reserve and the capital reserve were met. I'll caution you on one thing. This is a little bit misleading. We've always been asked to graph the residential percentage. Like the other presentations tonight, we do also look at all of the customer classes, and in this particular case, the cost of service for the residential was the most equitable, and so we are proposing that you raise the rates more significantly in 11 for the other user classes. This just shows you a snapshot of kind of where the money is going. In the lower left-hand box, you'll see that the increase that we have for 11 will generate about $1.5 million on this utility. And if you look at the increases in revenue requirements or expenses in capital, you can see that O&M is really essentially flat. And then we have some jumps in debt service due to some of those stimulus projects that I showed you, as well as a jump in rate-funded capital stemming, I guess the largest project is some filter media work at the water reclamation facility. So you can see we're actually generating a little bit more revenue requirement than we are new revenue, which is one of the reasons why we're seeing an overall cash reduction going into 2011 per our projections. If we looked and I cautioned you on this specifically at where the different classes are at, you can see that for the meter and flow, we're proposing a 3% increase for residential. You can see the resulting impacts on rates. And we also see the range here for commercial, domestic, and high-strength industrial. And you can see that ranges from 14 to 20%, and that's all stemming from that cost of service work that we did back in 2006 for this utility. We elect to use a little bit different approach, Councilor Roefling, in that we saw the disparities were significant enough that rather than trying to do a one-time correction for the water and water reclamation facility, we've elected to try to do disproportionate increases over time for our adjustments. It's been asked previously, when does this correct itself? And about 2013, all but high-strength industrial will be getting very close. And then in 2016, we see the increases becoming much similar for all of the different user classes. Just continuing then with some of the user classes in the community, in addition to high-strength meter and flow, you also charge some very wastewater-specific type things for the strength of the wastewater. You can see the increases that we're recommending for that at 16%. And you do have 4 different consecutive discharges across the area. You can see what we're recommending for increases there. Maybe a little bit explanation on the real low and the real high. On the real low side, the Harrisburg, that's a relatively new rate. And so as a result, I think it's closer to cost of service than what would be reflected in the other 3. And then on the Brandon side, the highest one, that rate can only be increased every other year. And so even though they're real close to the plant and have a relatively low cost of service, they tend to get higher increases in the years that we can raise their rates because it's an every year increase by contract. Looking just at kind of a simplistic way of looking at the increases, you can see that we've come from a pretty difficult period within the water reclamation facility in terms of playing some catch-up in terms of rates, double-digit increases from 7 to 10. We are now to the point where we're down to more of an inflationary increase for residential, and we project that forward for the next couple of years as well. Each year, AH West does do a regional rate survey across the 5-state area of South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota, Montana, and Wyoming. In this particular graph, it's the new 2010 rate information that we have for mechanical wastewater systems. So certainly if there's some lagoons out there, they can probably treat their wastewater for much less than what Sioux Falls does. But if we look at the 5-state area and we look at those systems that have mechanical wastewater systems, you can see that if Sioux Falls were to raise their rates as we proposed in 2011 and nobody else raises their rates in 2010, the net effect would be that we'd really be in about the same position as it relates to water reclamation facility for regional rate comparison. And this is based on about 7,500 gallons or 10 cubic feet per cubic feet, 100 cubic feet. This is probably more than gets discharged to your system. However, we started our regional rate comparison at 7,500, and we like to do some trend analysis, and so we've been using that consistently. And so some people take umbrage with the fact that the number is a little bit higher, but I think it is a good comparison from year to year. What people then are mostly interested in, what is the bottom line? And so if we look at that typical residential customer and we look at just the water reclamation, you can see that your average consumption here is only about 5,300 gallons as compared to that 7,500 gallons I showed you previously. If we equate that in 100 cubic feet, that's 7.1 CCF. So the 2010 monthly charge would have been $20. With a 3% increase, that's about 57 cent increase up to $20.65. That concludes the presentation for the water reclamation facility. Trent and I would be glad to answer any questions that you have.
Any questions? Councilor Anderson?
Can you go back a few screens here where you were showing the different rates? One more, please. There you go, right there. With the Brandon rates and everything like that, you said every other year. How long is that contract then that we have with Brandon? And will that, when that contract's ended, will we bring them in so that everything's more uniform? Okay, thank you.
Councilor Rolfing.
Thank you. You mentioned that we're able to produce, is it 21, or take care of 21 million gallons per day?
And that's the average rated capacity. I'm sure under peak flows, it's considered higher than that.
Oh,
35 million gallons per day, but that's the rated capacity of the facility.
okay. What are we doing right now on an average and peak? Okay, so we're two-thirds of the way to capacity, approximately. Okay. And looking into the, not crystal ball, but into the future, have we started planning for expansion and things like that? Okay. Okay, thank you. And the debt that is there, can anybody on one of the other committees ask me, is that debt reflected in the overall city debt? Or is that, as an enterprise function, is that part of the enterprise only and not part of the overall city debt? Gene here? Or Gene? Mark?
Councilor, it is part of the overall city debt, and it's booked accordingly on the monthly financial statements.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, the majority of the debt, what is that? What is the majority of the debt from?
Well, do you have the debt schedules with you? They've done a series of improvements over the years to both the water reclamation facility and to the wastewater collection system, and so it's about $72 million of debt that's attributed to improvements to those things. We could get you a detailed schedule if you'd like. I don't know if I know. We have it behind us if you want to know the details.
I was just curious what the majority item was that's causing all the debt that we're servicing.
Councilor, we'll get you a schedule, but it's a combination of growth-related activities like the east side sanitary sewer or the west side sanitary sewer system, as well as the reconstruction of the backbone sewer, which is currently underway, which is a central main. So it is a combination of both growth-related activities, but also rehabilitation projects. And we can give you a breakdown of that if you'd like.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Anybody else? Steve, were you done?
I am with Water Reclamation Facility. I'm the only individual, I guess, that gets the benefit to present to you twice this evening. Greg Anderson said since I was up here anyway, we could maybe do the reciprocal. Greg is the new superintendent of water for the City of Sioux Falls, and he'll be co-joining me tonight in the presentation for water purification. I've always presented water first and water reclamation second, so this will be the first time where water maybe benefits from having a more simplistic, straightforward presentation, because they do tend to look very similar from time to time. Now, this is the utility, unlike the wastewater we're collecting from the homes and getting it to the water reclamation facility. This is the utility that pulls the water, in your case, out of either a groundwater supply or a surface water supply, conveys that to the treatment plant, and then conveys that out to the distribution system within storage to the individual customers. You can see in your case, you will, as of 2012, have three fundamental sources. One will be the surface water intake on the Big Sioux River. One will be 55 wells distributed along the Big Sioux River, and there's some interconnection between those two, truth be known. And the third one will be a supply from Lewis and Clark, which you purchase as an emergency water supply moving forward. If we look at the first side of this after supply, it's treatment. In this case, the facility is quite a bit older than water reclamation, 1950s instead of 1980s. It, too, has had a series of improvements, the most recent one happening as we speak. Its ability to treat is about 54 million gallons per day, so quite a bit more than the water reclamation facility. It's a conventional process where you pull the mud out, soften the water, particulates out, soften the water, and then filter it before providing fluoridation and disinfection for the customer. and you're currently expanding your filters by a capacity of approximately 22 million gallons per day. As it gets out in the distribution system, you have a very extensive distribution system, much like water reclamation. In this case, it's about 950 miles of pipeline instead of 800 miles of pipeline. Throughout the system, it is supplemented by storage, both in terms of 5 ground storage reservoirs as well as 4 elevated tanks for a total of 24 million gallons of storage. You also have numerous valves and hydrants that need to be maintained throughout the utility. Again, I don't know that I want to get into a ton of detail on all the capital improvements, and Greg's probably in a better position to do so, but this utility is also going to see its increases stemming primarily from capital improvements. You can see the recent major capital improvements that have taken place are within the supply, within the treatment, and within the treatment. And there's some work on the wells. There was a clarification basin retrofit. You did a really nice maintenance shop down at the water purification plant. And you're currently constructing the 22 MGD filter upgrade for $7.5 million. Looking forward, one of the other major capital improvements you have that really isn't your capital improvement, but one that you're paying a very significant share of, is the Lewis and Clark, which is going to be a 45 million gallon per day surface water system on the Missouri River. South of here, from there they'll pipe the water approximately 50 miles up to your doorstep and bring you treated water. In the past, you were making dues payments, so as the federal money came in, you would match that federal money. And through 2007, you made dues payments of almost $9.7 million. In that 2007 timeframe, you and many of the other members of Lewis and Clark elected to make a prepayment. You sold a bond for $70 million, of which the net bond proceeds were $64.281, that you then turned over to Lewis and Clark over a 3-year period to help prepay both your original capacity for the system, which is termed base system capacity at 11.007 million gallons per day, as well as through a water supply study that was done in 2004 that showed that you had a somewhat precarious situation with your surface water supply and your groundwater supply because they're linked. And should you have a severe drought, it was recommended that you obtain additional supply. So you negotiated an agreement under which you'd get 17 million gallons of additional capacity from Lewis and Clark. And so the totality of the money here is intended to fund both your base system capacity and your additional capacity. With this, you're primarily all in for Lewis and Clark, with the exception that you elected for the wells for your additional capacity, you elected to pay for those on more of a pay-go basis originally, and so those dollars are not reflected in these current numbers that I show here. You also can see that given all the other improvements I've shown you, that this is a pretty big or very big investment for the city to make to sustain its long-term supply. If we look forward then, Greg and his staff have to really keep things working within the utility. You can see a series of capital improvements planned here. The first one on the supply, the second one within the water treatment plant to deal with the residuals that come out of the water. The next two have to do with growth and rehabilitation out in the system. And then lastly, the net cost for the Lewis and Clark wells in 2017 dollars are estimated to be about $6.5 million. I say net because the real cost is about $12.5 million in today's dollars, but in our prepayment, they've gotten good enough bids over there, and we've negotiated some cost-saving measures with Lewis and Clark that we actually have a credit on the book of about $7 million. And so if we take 12.5 minus 7, it's 5.4 in today's dollars, index that forward to 2017, and we have another liability that we're looking at out in the 2017 of about $6.5 million. This is the report card that we see for water, much like we had for water reclamation. In this case, we don't have that transfer that was a little bit harder to explain, and so with the reduced water sales, you see that operating revenue was a little bit less than expected. With the slower cost recovery, you can see that other income was also a little bit less than expected. Very much like water reclamation, Greg and his staff did a great job of watching their expenses, and so they were able to save a significant money on the operating side. They also had a little bit, some pretty good prices and a little bit slower activity on the capital side, so they saved a little money there. And the net effect for this particular utility is the cash balance actually went up by over $1 million from what was anticipated from 2009 projected to 2009 actual. If we then look at some of the assumptions that we had to make, and these are really very similar to what we saw for water purification, just a different utility. We had to incorporate the new operating and capital budgets for 2011 into the model. We did downgrade the cost recovery projections a little bit to reflect the state of the economy. We went into 2010 revenue projections, and we're actually in the model, have those a little bit less than even what you budgeted by virtue of what we saw in 2009. You were also fortunate enough to get a couple SRF loans from the stimulus dollars or the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act for water as well. A little bit less for savings here, just short of $1 million in savings as a net effect from that. And then probably one of the bigger changes here and more complicated ones is the ensuing water purchase from Lewis and Clark. You were obligated by contract to buy a minimum of 2.75 million gallons of water from Lewis and Clark. In 2012, we think you'll have about 9 months of that purchased at a cost of approximately $1.6 million that you'll be purchasing. Then in 2013 will be the first year in which you buy all throughout the year Lewis and Clark water. In working with your staff, we elected to increase that slightly in 2013 up to 3 million gallons at a cost of about $2.3 million in 2013, assuming Lewis and Clark's rates go up by 4% each year. And then we did increase that ever so slightly each year until we got up to a 5.5 million gallons per day in 2018. If you compare that to your total, remember you have about 28.007 MGD of total capacity from Lewis and Clark. So we're really looking at buying a minimum amount from Lewis and Clark on an annual basis and then saving that water supply should a severe drought occur. These growth factors looking forward are exactly the same as what I showed you for water. Water reclamation, we sat down with both utilities together to do these projections. The only noticeable difference is under electricity, where I had 10% per year projected for water reclamation. We only have 4% here. You learned earlier that you have your own electric utility that provides electricity for the water plant. It's anticipated that the costs for that utility are going to be more controllable than what you'd see on the open market, and so we did lower those utility costs based on discussion with staff. If we look then at the O&M breakdown, again, this isn't the total revenue requirements, but it's really just the operation and maintenance. In this case, your O&M budget for 2011 for water is about $14 million, so quite a bit bigger utility than what you have for water reclamation. Pretty similar to water, you can see that once again labor is the predominant expense in this case, although it's short of half in some of the other chunks such as supplies and materials, and that's really primarily chemicals are a pretty big chunk of what you pay for your water treatment provisions. Moving forward, this is a similar new graphic for water in which we're tracking debt. In this case, you can see that your debt service is going to be pretty flat. In 2013, you sold kind of a creative, I don't know if that's right fair. It was a very sellable note within the market, but given the way that we had to do some rate increases for water, we worked with your finance department and we sold a 30-year bond for Lewis and Clark, of which the first 6 years were interest only, and then the last 24 years were to amortize the full principal along with the resulting interest. And so that jump from 2012 to 2013 is really not so much new debt for new projects taking place within Sioux Falls, but rather a reflection of us weaning ourselves from the interest only and moving into the full amortization of the bond for the last 24 years. You can also see that the debt is pretty high in this utility right now on an actual basis at about $118 million, much of that stemming from Lewis and Clark. But you can see as we make our payments over time, right now there's no major increases anticipated in that debt, and through the 10-year planning horizon, we see a pretty significant drop in that overall debt. I did do those same numbers, and if we take your percentage of debt to your percentage of budget, although you have a larger debt carrying in your water purification utility, you actually only have a 19% ratio compared to that target of 30 to 60% because of the bigger denominator that you have. And so on a debt basis, this utility actually tracks better than water reclamation, even though it has a higher debt load. In this particular utility, we have the same two reserves that we planned for water reclamation, with the exception we have no restricted requirements in this utility other than bond covenants that are typically taking place elsewhere. We did, however, recommend in this utility that you create a rate stabilization reserve. It's somewhat of a complicated reserve, but the cost to purchase water from Lewis and Clark are slightly higher than the embedded cost of producing water internally. And so as a result, if we were to have a major drought and we had to purchase a significant amount of water from Lewis and Clark, that's going to come at a cost. And so what we did is we recommended that you put together a rate stabilization reserve, which is equal to 2 years of the incremental Lewis and Clark costs for the total capacity that you'd purchased during that drought event. And for the first full year, that's about $1.7 million that we're trying to achieve. In addition, we'd once again have 90 days of operating reserve, or about 25% of the year, at about $3.5 million, and we used a similar target for capital at 15% of the 5-year average CIP, which in this particular utility, because most of the costs have been going to Lewis and Clark, is actually slightly smaller at $1.2 million. This is the same, I guess somebody laughed when I said simple graphic last time, but this is the same simple graphic that I put together for the water purification or water utility. You can see this one is not quite as rosy at the beginning, given kind of where we've come and where we're going. It's also a little bit more complicated. I have 3 lines now. One represents the operating reserve that we fill up initially. The next one is the Lewis and Clark rate stabilization reserve, although we didn't start that until we started getting closer to purchasing water from Sioux Falls. And so we filled that bucket up second, the blue bucket. But you can see in 2011 we show some red bucket and no blue. That's because we won't be purchasing Lewis and Clark water until 12. And so any excess cash that we had in 2011 went to the CIP reserve instead of to the rate stabilization reserve. And then the third line above is the one for the capital reserve. You can see the recommended residential increases. Again, they may be a little bit misleading because the residential increases aren't going to be the same as all the other user classes. But in this particular case, we're recommending a 14% residential rate increase amongst the series of increases we've had to have for Lewis and Clark. With that, we project an 11 that will meet the reserves are in place at the time. Due to some capital improvements, however, in 2012 and the beginning of purchase of water from Lewis and Clark in 2012, we project another dip in the overall cash amount despite the 14% rate increase. And then from there, with one more 14% rate increase, we start climbing out of that. We climb out of that in a pretty significant way in 14, 15, and 16 to the point where we generate cash. And then in 2017, that's the period where I showed you that we'd be purchasing those additional wells from Lewis and Clark. At this point, we have those in as a cash purchase. And so you can see that the net effect is we drop our cash down, and then we have a pretty soft landing in 2017 and 2018. And even with sub-inflationary increases in the out years, we were able to generate a little bit of additional cash. We thought about trying to right-size that, and we just decided that either you could make some extra payments on your debt, or you could avoid some debt in the future, or if worse came to worse, you could lower those rate increases a little bit in some of the out years. But it's a little bit fuzzier picture in the near term, and then we're working toward a very healthy utility moving forward with inflationary increases in the out years. This is a similar table that shows where the increases are coming from and then where they're going. In this particular case, under Greg's leadership and some of the things that they were able to do, they're actually going to drop all 3 of the costs that I show you here: operation and maintenance, rate-funded capital, and debt service. The Lewis and Clark debt service is fixed by structure of the bond, so we didn't have any flexibility there. So we'll actually see a net reduction in the overall revenue requirements in 2011 for this utility of $2.7 million. But given some of the difficult situation we've been in and the major improvements we're trying to run through this utility, we have kind of a deficiency in cash, and so we still recommended the increase, and where those increases will go is to help buffer those 2 reserve funds that I showed you on the previous graphic. I hinted to you that we didn't have we had somewhat of a disproportionate increases for the different user classes. In water reclamation, it so happened through the cost of service that residential was in the best position and the others were less advantageous. In this case, it was the opposite, which the net effect you'll see at the end is actually kind of makes it good for everybody. But residential is the one that will have the 14% meter and revenue flow growth. And then commercial and industrial are somewhat lower at 8 to 10%. And then Lincoln County and Lewis and Clark, because they are paying for Lewis and Clark on their own, we could not charge Lewis and Clark to them as part of the cost of service analysis. And so as a result, their increase is more of an inflationary increase to keep up with costs and not so much one that reflects the fact of the major Lewis and Clark costs that we're paying for. If we look at just kind of that snapshot as it relates to residential rates, we are proposing a 14% residential increase in 11. We foresee that having to take place in 12 and 13, at which time we see inflationary increases for the predominance of the remainder of the planning horizon, with the exception of the last 2 years where we think it'll be sub-inflationary. This is the same graphic from our 2010 rate survey. Again, the same 5-state area. In this case, we're looking at surface water systems. If I have wells where I don't have to treat the water, once again, it's probably quite a bit less expensive than this. You can see that if Sioux Falls were to raise their rates as proposed in 2011 and nobody else raised their rates, you can see that we do have a jump from probably the 35th percentile up to about the 65th percentile. However, I'll caution you that you're really kind of right on the knife's edge. You're a little bit below those that have a $30 water bill, and then you'll go to a little bit above that. I would expect if I showed you the actual graph in 2011 that many of those $30 systems will raise their rates slightly, and you'll be somewhere in that average or slightly less than average as it relates to your water rates. This is a trend. When we started, you were probably very close to the top of this chart, but that Lewis and Clark is a very major investment to have the sustainability that you need, and so we're seeing this change over time. This is the same graphic that I presented for water reclamation, where it shows that your average is indeed less than what we use in our rate survey. If you used 7.100 cubic feet per month, the increase in water at 14% for a residential customer would be $2.86 for a proposed water bill and monthly water bill in 2011 of about $23.27. Now, because most people, when they get their water bill, really commonly lump that together, and it's probably even beyond this, but they probably water reclamation, stormwater, and probably some of the other things that you charge for in the community are really their water bill. And so we've always tracked this over time. And you can see in 2010 that you're about a third of the way down in terms of your South Dakota peers. And if you were to raise your rates as proposed for water reclamation, and storm, you see that the net effect would be that you'd leap over Brookings and Huron in the event that they don't raise their rates. We've also then shown that what the effect would be for residential for the increase for both water and water reclamation in this last table. And you can see that that increase would be about $3.43 for combined water and water reclamation for a proposed monthly bill in 2011 if you use the average of $43.92. One last graphic, presenting this just on behalf of your staff. You do have some other miscellaneous utility charges across the community that they're proposing to increase starting in January 1 of 2011. The first one is a trip charge, and this has to do with going out and doing different connections within the system. Right now, you don't charge if somebody were to temporarily leave a house and then come back to the house and they wanted their water turned on and turned off. You do not charge for that. But what we've found in Sioux Falls is that sometimes you'll go out and meet with a contractor that you're going to help them with the meter installation. When you get out there, they're not ready, and you end up making 3 or 4 trips back. And so this new charge that we have for the trip charge at $28 per trip is really for those extraordinary events, and it's meant to be an incentive for people to be more ready when you come out to help them. On the security deposits, you desire to have 2.5 months of your average costs in place as a security deposit. In talking to Perry, I learned that you haven't increased these since the early to mid-1990s, and so this is kind of one of those maybe increases where it was time to make some adjustments. I think they look relatively significant on the surface, but remember they're a deposit type activity, and they're really just trying to reflect the current state of affairs. And then lastly, you also have a late collection fee. This is a housekeeping item. In your past accounting system, if you took in $1 as part of a late collection fee, your accounting system wasn't sophisticated enough to prorate that, and so it just went 50-50 to both water and water reclamation. In this case, the new system is capable of, if 70% of that was a water charge and 30% of that was water reclamation, those late fee revenues will be prorated appropriately to both of the utilities instead of a simple 50-50 split. With that concludes the presentation for water and water purification, and Greg and I would be glad to answer any questions that you have.
Any questions for Steve or Greg? Councilor Litz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Steve, is it now for the Sioux River, when we draw water off of here, and maybe this is for Greg, we're drawing off the Big Sioux Aquifer basically when the river water, the surface water goes down. And Lewis and Clark, if I remember right, are they drawing off the Ogallala Reservoir? They're drilling underneath the river going into the Ogallala Reservoir. Am I correct on those two statements?
I can't tell you about Lewis and Clark, because their wells are
amount of collectors that go right underneath the river, so
Okay.
I know what aquifer that is, I can't answer that.
Okay.
For Sioux Falls, we draw water from the Big Sioux River plus the Big Sioux Falls.
Okay, and my question had to do with, you mentioned drought a couple of times, and it got me to thinking, the Ogallala Reservoir, if I remember right, dips all the way down into Oklahoma and I think part of Texas, and so there's probably a lot of people drawing off of that. And if we had a drought up here as to where the river went dry and we're drawing off the Big Sioux Aquifer and we're worried about it, is there been some examination as to why the Ogallala Reservoir would not be dry as well, and we could not count on the Lewis and Clark water?
Councilor Litz, I think I helped with the 2004 water supply study for the city in addition to some of the rate work we've done, and so I can do my best to answer a couple of those questions. First of all, from the Lewis and Clark perspective, they really feel that is Missouri River water that they're pulling out. The wells are being drilled immediately adjacent to the Missouri River, and the reason that they went with wells instead of a conventional intake is just to try to prevent turbidity. So what they're trying to do is go underneath the river, use the in situ sand that's there, let the water come from the river through the sand into the aquifer, and then eventually pump that into the treatment plant. And so if there's a relationship with Ogallala there, it's really the Missouri River that Lewis and Clark is counting on. And with the significant storage in the mainstream reservoirs all the way down on the Missouri River, most people feel that that's the most drought-proof source that South Dakota has in terms of looking long-term. In terms of your supply, you pull off the river and then you pull off the groundwater. But the groundwater is all, if you look, it's a ribbon right next to the river, and you've had some water supply assessments done. And if you had no water flow in the river and you started pumping out of the aquifer and cut your usage in half, it's projected that would last about 271 days. And so it is, in the event, it doesn't happen real often, but in the event that you have no flow and you're relying solely on the aquifer, it's a little bit of a tenuous situation because the two are really one and the same, and that aquifer gets recharged by the Big Sioux River on an annual basis. And so the thought was to diversify your water supply sources by going down and picking up the Missouri River as the other piece.
Very good. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Greg.
Councilor Rolfing.
Seems like I always have a question. I apologize, but I'm new and I need to learn. What do you mean by the purchasing wells from Lewis and Clark?
I maybe misspoke in terms of that term. They will own the asset, but when we asked for the additional 17 million gallons per day of capacity, they were just in the process of putting the pipeline in, so they upsized the pipeline from the river to here to meet that need. They expanded the plant from 28 million gallons per day to 45 million gallons per day, and they identified how many additional wells they'll need to meet our 17 MGD basis. And I don't remember exactly how many wells it is, but because we were going to need those on kind of an as-needed basis, we didn't include those in the prepayment with the bond. We decided to pay those as we went. And so I did misspeak in terms of the purchase. That was a poor choice of words. It's our reimbursement for their construction of the additional well capacity for us.
Upsize the project.
Right.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Nope, that's fine. And I not congratulate, but I think the reserves that you're putting aside for the 2 years, for the difference in cost between our cost of producing the water and their cost, I commend you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Steve.
You bet. Thank you.
I have three quick slides. I'm Galen Huber. I'm Street Utility Manager. Each year, the council is asked by resolution to pass the street front footage assessment for the city of Sioux Falls. That generates, this year, it will generate about $4.3 million, which will go into my budget to do that. And what I'd like to do is basically break down, I have 3 slides. One's going to show you my major winter expense, one's going to show my major summer expense, and then the front foot. This is my major winter expenses. Of course, snow removal. I have approximately $7 million in my operating budget to do snow removal, and chemical is one of those major components within that. You can see that in 2008 we had a little bit of a blip in our liquid purchase, but Our bids are just going out right now. We should open up the bids in the next couple of weeks. We'll know what our 2010 liquid and salt costs will be, and we'll see if 2008 was an anomaly or if 2010 the prices are going to go up. We do ship our liquid in by rail, and we ship our salt in by truck. So sometimes the fuel costs are you'll see in the price. One of the major costs for me during the summer is, of course, asphalt. I have a street paving crew that goes out and does overlays within residential streets and some of the arterial streets. And this year, in 2010, we got a really good price. And probably with that really good price means I get to do additional work. And I assume everybody in this room is smiling to know that I'm going to do additional work on the streets to make them a little bit smoother to drive on. So that was a good thing for us. And again, we'll wait and see what 2011 does, but in 2010 we got a really good price for that. In 2011, we're recommending that we hold the dollar per front foot that we currently have in place. What we'd like to do is do a study during the 2010 here to take a look and see if we need to increase that, and if we do, what it's going to increase it. But for right now, what we would like to do is just hold that at $1 and ask that you pass that resolution. Any questions?
All right, no questions. Thank you. Mark, some closing comments?
Yes, just in closing, again, thank you for sitting through what we consider a pretty a long marathon presentation, but we hope it gives you a good snapshot of what all the increases will mean to the customers of Sioux Falls and, in some respects, the adjacent counties. I was asked at the break, why do we use consultants? And I think one of the key things that we do is that we've outside of the expertise that are running the plants or running the landfill and the depth of those teams, we can really tap the experience of these consultants that work with multiple communities. We can go in some of our strategy meetings and say, how are they addressing reserves? What kind of drivers are they putting in the backs of their models as it relates to inflation, chemicals, you name it. And so there's just it's hard to answer that in a short comment besides their expertise, and we believe we've got the top in the region. So with that, we believe it's very important to stay on track with the direction that we've taken with the rates over time. Back in 2006, when this process started, we had the option of either doubling rates in some respects or taking off kind of as a nice approach, and then over time raise the rates. You can see in most of these utilities we are almost to that point where we're getting back to inflationary numbers, but not the case yet in water, and so we would ask for your support in the coming weeks. We also give you an overall snapshot. By the end of this week, we would provide you about a 4-page cardstock piece that summarizes the breadth of what we've gone through today, so you can have that with you if you have calls from constituents. We also have this beauty of this on Granicus, so if anyone has questions, they can replay it. And with that, we thank you for your time today.
Any quick questions of Mark?
Mark, just one quick question. Can you just give me historically, can you say why were we not raising these rates? I know you guys have done a great job taking care of it in the recent history, but in the past, what was the rationale for that? Why weren't they raising the rates?
Actually, Mark, could I let Councilor Brown answer that question for you?
That's a great question, and I was going to comment on this because it was about in 2005, before Mark got on board, that the council saw that we had gone 10 years in some cases on some utilities without increases, and Kevin and Mark then brought in these consultants because those utilities were in trouble. And it was a difficult time to do some of these increases over the year, but we've done that in a slow, methodical way to get this back to a cost of service model. And if we didn't do that, taxpayers would be subsidizing other users on the system. If Sue waters her lawn more than I do, my tax dollars would have to help subsidize that. So we wanted to get it back to a cost of service model. And so I really commend Mark and Kevin for putting us on this path, as
Yeah,
difficult as it has been.
It's great, and I like the concept of building a reserve like that, too. It only
Yep.
makes sense. So it's great.
Good.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, we've got a fiscal committee starting right after this, right?
You know what, I think we will forego it, given that we have a meeting starting in a half hour, but we'll regroup and find another time to meet for that.
Okay, hopefully all those who are waiting for the fiscal committee can reschedule and make that work. Just a little recap, if we could talk or think about how we want to conduct our committee meetings, whether we want to do them in here or over in the multipurpose room, and think about all those consequences and reasons for that. As well, as far as our leadership meetings go with the administration, the old counselors know this, but the new counselors should know that you're all welcome to attend, just so there's not more than 4 of us. So come over if you want, and you can watch and participate. Really what we do is we review the upcoming agenda, so you all have an idea of what's going to happen, but you're all welcome to attend. And if Sue or I cannot attend, we'll generally find somebody to make sure that there is some representation there. So feel free to experience those.
Greg, could you mention where it's at? So
Oh,
some
sure.
folks.
It's over at over at City Hall in the old commission room. Meeting room is where we usually meet, but it's at 9 o'clock on Thursdays. So, any other items we need to discuss or talk about? Anything? Okay. All right. Well, then let's adjourn and get ready for 7.